controversial bills in House of Commons, and then they go through all the stages, and then they come to the House of Lords. And sometimes they're quite different when they come to the House of Lords because the government adds things. In this case, it added things so late that the Commons hadn't had a chance to see them at all. And so in the night of 14 government defeats, what we were able to do is take all the amendments that were late amendments that the Commons hadn't seen, and we were able to vote them down. And it was an extraordinary night because most of the time, our average age is quite old. I think the average age these days is 71, and there's a lot of people in their 80s and 90s. And it's very difficult to stay up late at night and having started in the morning and so on. But on this particular night, the winds were coming so thick and fast that people stayed because they were actually enjoying themselves. And those amendments that we threw out cannot be brought back at any other stage except by a new bill. So we were able to actually quash those nastier bits of the bill. I mean, a lot of the bill is nasty anyway, but the worst bits have gone. In the meantime, though, I don't want this, if you don't mind, to be just about the police bill, because in the meantime, we've had 3 other bills come through that I've worked on. There've been other bills as well, but 3. And one is the Judicial Review and Courts Bill. Another is the Nationality and Borders Bill. And a third is the Subsidy Control Bill. Now, the Subsidy Control Bill sounds incredibly boring, but in fact, it's all about state aid. And so all of the 3 bills that have come through since contain repressive measures, quite often a power grab by the executive. In almost every piece of legislation we see, they take power away from Parliament and give it to ministers, secretaries of state. And amazingly, the legal people in the House of Lords, the QCs and the ex-judges and so on, they absolutely loathe that. And so we have a sort of vanguard of legal people who say to the government, that's actually against international law, or that is against our law. And that means we are occasionally able to defeat the government. Now, the police bill was exceptional in that because it was so big, it contained all these things, and we were coming in from different directions all the time. It was very, very difficult to pull apart and examine properly. There's also the problem that the government is trying to get through a lot of these bills very, very fast. And so they're giving us very few days to debate them. That means last week, for example, the House of Lords sat on 2 consecutive evenings, once until 3:21 in the morning, and the next day sat again until 2:20 a.m. And this is not a way to run the country. I am awful at staying up late at night, and so my colleague, my Green Party colleague, Natalie Bennett, she takes over the night shift, thank goodness. And we together have tried to highlight the worst bits of all the legislation going through. But of course, there are a lot of other people in the House of Lords who have made the most incredible efforts to stop a lot of this legislation. And the public response to the bill, the police bill, and the public anger really affected the peers. The peers inside who were fighting the government actually felt supported by that. It made a massive difference. And it also put pressure on Labour, because at the start of the evening of the 14 defeats, Labour were not going to push that many things to a vote. And in fact, because of the energy in the chamber, the energy of opposition, Labour actually pushed more things to a vote. And so it was an incredible time. However, it's not over yet. The amendments that we managed to vote down can't come back, but the rest of the bill can. And we have an opportunity again to point out the things that are illegal. And if all the legal people in the House of Lords say we're not letting this pass, then we have a chance on a few of the issues. But the chances are that when it comes back, it won't be radically different, and we will be forced to allow it through. And that's very depressing, but I'm afraid that's the way democracy is structured. Because we are not an elected chamber, we have to give way to the elected chamber, and that's as it should be. The big problem at the moment is, of course, well, there's so many big problems, it's impossible to count them all, but having an 80+ majority in the House of Commons, the government is very overconfident, if you like, because of course it doesn't need to argue anything in the House of Commons, it's got the votes. Whereas when it comes to the House of Lords, it really does have to argue, and there are times when it has to listen. And I think for the first time since I've been in the House of Lords in over 8 years, people are actually texting me and emailing me and tweeting at me to say, I never thought I'd say this, but thank goodness for the Lords, because we've actually given the government a little time to think, which is, of course, a very healthy thing. I don't know if people know much about the House of Lords, but at the moment there's over 800 of us. And it's a very difficult chamber to categorise, because there are a lot of crossbenchers, probably well over 160 now, I think, and they are all political parties and none. So convincing them on a piece of legislation is very important, because 160 votes is quite a lot. And we have pulled together in a way that I think I've just never seen before. And so while we won't be able to stop the police bill, there are elements we might be able to stop. And on these other bills, for example, the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is a particularly nasty. I keep thinking, oh, this is the worst bill I've ever seen. And then another one turns up that's even worse. And the Nationality and Borders Bill is one of those terrible bills, because it makes refugees into criminals. It offers virtually no safe routes into the UK. So it forces people to use traffickers and illegal routes, or other routes that the government would prefer us not to use. And so bill after bill is of a type that I never thought I'd see. It's actually, they are thoroughly nasty, repressive, and at times inhumane pieces of legislation. And that's actually quite depressing to see day after day. But we continue to fight. So if there's any questions, I hope to be able to answer you. If I can't answer your questions, I will send my answers through later. If I can't answer the questions, it's probably because we're actually in recess. This is my 3rd day of recess, and my brain is turning to jelly, which is very, very healthy. And it means I'm forgetting what's going on. Julie, are there questions?
I have one. So could you give us some examples of the 14 government, like the amendments that you've managed to repel?
Yes, as I say, they were the worst ones. Sadly, we couldn't do anything about the Roma and traveller rights, because they'd gone through before. But there were things, for example, there were extra powers for the police to stop protests that were disruptive. Now, protests are always disruptive. I mean, that's part of the beauty of them. But judging whether people shouting is a nuisance, the bill was full of very vague terms, and people leapt on this and didn't like it, and so that sort of thing was voted out. Labour did change it did put down 2 amendments. One was to put misogyny, to make misogyny a crime, a hate crime, and the second was the government were trying to stop people gluing themselves to roads, and Labour said they were just going to ban it from A roads. Let me just think about what else. And there were things like suspicionless stop and search. We voted that out. And there was also something about if they caught you carrying anything that could be seen to be something where you might lock yourself on or glue yourself to something. So if you're carrying a tube of glue in your rucksack, or you're carrying a bike lock, for example, then the police can stop you and arrest you. And so that sort of thing was voted out. And they always sound ludicrous. But the problem was, of course, that the government was reacting to a relatively small number of people who got very upset about the roads being blocked. And I mean, personally, I see the roads blocked in London every single day, and ambulances not able to get through. But clearly, those few people on the major roads upset a lot of people who had influence with the government.
Thanks, Jenny. Could you tell us a bit more about why the government escalated even further in November by adding those amendments? What were they trying to achieve, and why do you think this happened afterwards, after the first bill was proposed?
I think they panicked slightly when they saw so many right-wing people saying, oh, protest has gone too far and that sort of thing. And so although they were already trying to inhibit protest and freedom of expression, they just added these extra amendments to cover the things like the glue on roads. And I think they just panicked. And the amendments weren't even written very well. So, there are all sorts of reasons to throw them out. I've forgotten the second half of your question.
It was about what they are trying to achieve with this bill. What's the political reasoning in terms of the bill, like altogether, and also these amendments? What do you think this means in this political context?
Well, I'm very harsh on this government because I think they are an absolutely corrupt bunch of people. And so my view on this is that they hate opposition because of their arrogance and their the way that they see people who protest as not being, for example, they see protesters as a lump of people, a group of people, and they can't understand that protest happens for all sorts of reasons. I mean, I've been to anti-fracking protests where it's just row upon row of middle class people who don't want frackers in their backyard. Very polite retired people. We're not just a sort of uniform bunch of semi-thugs, which I think is how the government sees us. I see a question here.
Yeah, I can read it for everyone. So, question to Jenny Jones by Caroline. My MP is a staunch conservative. I've already written to her about the PCSC bill and the Nationality and Borders bill. Who else should I write to? I can't go on demos. Thank you very much for your work in trying to improve these awful bills.
That's a really good question, because the impulse when bills get to the House of Lords is for people to lobby Lords. Now, most peers don't have any staff, and as I say, there are a complete mix of views, and so it's very hit and miss, but I will explain who you should lobby. First, you must lobby your MP, and if it's a Conservative, then don't say, oh, I never hear from them, or they just fob me off. The fact is, every single letter counts, and if MPs understand that there is opposition from people all over the place, then it will affect them. And we've seen the government several times make complete U-turns on policy because of public pressure. So don't give up. Always write to your MP. On the House of Lords, what would be a good idea is, and I think this is something that perhaps ought to come from central CND or perhaps get something from us from the Green Party, but find out which peers have been talking on the issues you care about. You can look it all up in Hansard and so on, and write to them. As I say, they might not write back because they can't cope most of the time with the volume of emails that they get. But just a quick letter of support saying, oh, I really appreciated what you said, blah, that goes a long way. And of course, always lobby Labour, because Labour is the main opposition. Without Labour, we cannot defeat the government, and it's not easy for Labour at times because, of course, they are the government in waiting. They do not want to behave in a way that is a little bit pushy or I mean, I'm free because the Green Party's views are so clear and so so liberal that I can say and do what I like, but it's quite different for Labour. It's harder for them. So lobbying the Labour Party, don't bother individual Labour peers, lobby the Labour Party, and that will affect them in the House of Commons as well, of course.
Could you give us some reasons as to why we should keep writing to people at this stage where it feels like a lot of the things that are relating to the right to protest have softened a bit? So why should we keep fighting?
Because this is a government that if you give them an inch, they run a mile, or whatever the saying is. They take a lot of advantage of any weakness that they see, in public views. They are very aware of public views. They run a lot of polls, opinion polls. So although all the bills after going through the House of Lords will be a bit better because we have experts in the House who can rewrite the bill in various parts and that sort of thing, they are still bad bills. They are still horrible. And if you can keep writing letters, that's absolutely fantastic because the decisions are made in Parliament. I mean, the government makes a decision to try to get something through, but then they have to get it through. And so if all the time that the legislation is being ruled on by Parliament, you have to let them know what you think.
Thanks. We have another question on this. So Khalida said, my MP is brilliant, Afsana Begum. Who else can we lobby when your local MP is active?
Well, it's first of all, it is always good to write to that MP and say thanks a lot, even if it's just 4 lines or something, because or tweet if you're on social media, tweet at them, because I frequently do things that are a little bit outspoken, and it's always great to have somebody tell me it's okay. That was a good thing to say. As I say, lobby the major parties. Don't bother going to different MPs because they won't pick up your concerns, because MPs only deal with their own constituents. And so write to the National Party, and even if they don't reply, they will see and assess the numbers of people writing to them and lobbying them. And I still think we are in dangerous territory on our freedoms, our civil liberties. And so there is some way to go yet.
Mark says, I wrote to my Tory MP about the police and criminal bill, and he is in support of it. He thinks there is too much fuss over it, and it's not restrictive to peaceful protest. He states in his letter, the bill is to ensure essential service and to operate without interference and against disruptive protests. So Tory party see all forms of protest as distributive.
As disruptive, I think Jenny's, yes, they do. They see all forms of protest as the lower class is rising up against them, and they really don't like it. Your Tory MP is wrong, and I very much doubt if you will listen to common sense. But if there is any sort of group letter, that group explanation that you can send, it doesn't hurt to just drop him another email explaining where he's wrong.
Good idea. I was wondering about your experience in the House of Lords in the process. Why do you think the Lords had this much power on this occasion, and do you think that the Lords will continue to hold such a strong position in making future bills less terrible, I suppose?
I'm probably going far with my brief from you, but the Tories in the House of Lords Lords are mostly the one nation kind who do believe in civil liberties and human rights and things like that, and they're even good on nature and stuff. And that's why many of them are absolutely horrified by the way the government is behaving. And they see them as a bunch of louts. That's what one Tory peer said to me the other day. And for example, on the nationality bill, last week we saw the most radical amendment, a good radical amendment, coming from 4 Tory peers. And so I think there's an anger in the House of Lords about how the government is treating us, and it's you know, the sitting until the early hours of the morning and things like that. It's an abuse. It's an abusive procedure, and they don't have to do that. They could give us more time, but it would slow the bills down. They want the bills through very, very fast, and so they're not going to give up.
Do we have any more questions to Jenny? Keep them coming. If you prefer to put your mic on, that's fine as well.
So I could ask a question, if I may, and that is, now that it's finished in the Lords, what's going to happen to it next? Have you any idea when it gets debated in the Commons, how long it takes? And do you have at this stage any inclination of how the Commons might vote?
I think it's pretty clear that the Commons will just vote through whichever version the government wants. Now, the government might change it a little bit, but there's absolutely no guarantee, and we have no date at the moment in the diary for it coming back. The next bit of when it comes back is called ping pong, and that's when we look at the Commons amendments and we decide if they've gone far enough or not. And we basically get one chance to sort of throw stuff out. But after that, we have to give way. So at the moment, there's no date, and we don't know what the final text will be. And we can't be sure that we'll have enough votes to actually change it if it is still awful. I'm sorry about that, but that's these things are a mystery. There's something in Parliament called the usual channels. Now, it always sounds to me as if it's capital letters U and C, usual channels. And this is when the government basically tells Labour and Lib Dems what's going to happen. So it's not a negotiation or anything. It's just the government telling us how it's going. And Greens aren't part of that. So we don't get to hear about future legislation until it appears on the order paper, which is a nuisance quite a lot of time. But no, so far, no date for the police bill. I would like to say that all the protests and all the letters and everything has contributed to the government being less ferocious. It does work. They care about public opinion, and although it's difficult sometimes to see the movement, there is movement, and people like me are very grateful for it.